black car stopped outside a famous restaurant in the middle of the city. The kind of place where rich people often went, where the lights outside glowed warmly, and the doorman bowed as soon as a luxury car appeared. Inside that car sat a woman who was known by many. She was a millionaire, and not just any millionaire. She was elegant, sharp, and carried herself like someone who was used to respect everywhere she went. When she stepped out, her heels clicked against the stone pavement, and everyone near the entrance looked at her. Some whispered to each other, trying to guess who she was. But anyone who knew about wealth and power could tell from the way she walked that she was not ordinary. The millionaire woman held her head high, her designer dress shimmered under the lights, and the expensive handbag on her arm made the staff rush to open the door for her. She gave a small nod, the kind of nod that showed she expected such treatment. For her this was normal. She had spent years building her wealth, years in boardrooms where people listened when she spoke, years in places where her presence alone commanded attention. So here too she expected the same, respect, comfort, and above all, perfection in service. Inside the restaurant, the air smelled of fine food, roasted meats, fresh herbs, sauces that had been simmering for hours. The sound of soft music floated through the room, and polished glasses sparkled on every table. Couples sat enjoying candlelight dinners, businessmen in suits discussed deals, and waiters moved quickly, balancing trays with precision. When the millionaire entered, the entire atmosphere seemed to change. Her presence was like a sudden wave. The waiters straightened. The manager hurried forward, and even the diners glanced up, curious. She walked confidently, her sharp eyes scanning the restaurant as if checking whether it was worthy of her time. She noticed the details, the chandeliers, the polished silver, the quality of the chairs, and after a quick look, she gave a satisfied nod. The manager stepped closer, welcoming her in English, but she barely reacted. She simply replied in Chinese, her voice calm but firm. She asked for a table in the best part of the restaurant, near the window, where the city lights could be seen, glittering like diamonds in the night. The staff froze for a moment, not because her request was strange, but because they did not understand a single word. The millionaire woman spoke again, slowly this time, repeating her request in Chinese. But still, the waiters looked at each other helplessly. One of them smiled nervously, another pointed toward a table. But it was not the table she wanted. She frowned, her eyebrows tightening as she shook her head. Her words flowed in her native tongue, graceful yet sharp, but to the staff it was just a string of sounds they could not make sense of. The millionaire was used to being understood. She was used to people rushing to fulfill her wishes. Yet here, in this expensive restaurant, no one seemed to know what she was saying. It felt like a small crack in her perfect evening. She was hungry. She wanted peace. But instead she was facing blank stares. She sighed deeply, her patience already thinning, and with a graceful but irritated wave of her hand, she tried again, pointing to the window section, speaking clearly, but again the staff failed to catch her meaning. Some nearby diners had begun to watch, their eyes curious. Some whispered, wondering if this wealthy woman was complaining about the food, or if she was asking for something rare. No one guessed the truth, that it was simply a language barrier. The millionaire tapped her fingers against her bag, a small sign of her rising irritation. She was used to fast results, not delays. She expected people to adapt to her, not the other way around. And this small situation was starting to feel larger than it really was. The manager tried to offer a polite smile, bowing slightly, and gesturing toward a table near the center of the room. But that table was not what she wanted. She spoke again in Chinese, her tone sharper now, her eyes narrowing. She felt insulted. She felt as though the restaurant was failing her, failing to provide the respect and attention that her wealth and status demanded. To her it was unbelievable that in such a famous place, no one spoke her language. She thought to herself, was she really supposed to struggle like an ordinary traveler? She was not ordinary. She was powerful. She was used to doors opening before she even touched them. At last, one waiter, nervous and sweating slightly, led her to the table by the window. Perhaps guessing what she wanted from her gestures, she sat down, her chin slightly raised. But her mood was already sour. The beginning of the evening had been ruined for her. She looked around at the polished glasses, the shining silverware, and instead of feeling pleased, she felt irritated. Her thoughts raced. How could a restaurant of this level not have a single person who could understand her? She was already planning in her mind that she might not stay long. Perhaps she would leave after making a scene. Perhaps she would call someone to complain. Whatever she would do, she promised herself she would not let this go. And so, the millionaire woman sat at her table, her eyes sharp as she watched the staff move around, her heart beating with growing annoyance. Her perfect evening had started with a crack, and she was waiting, expecting, almost demanding, that someone, anyone, step forward to fix it. Yet for now, the air around her was tense, filled with polite smiles from waiters who did not understand, and sharp glances from a woman who was not used to being ignored. This was just the beginning, but the storm. Inside her was already building. The millionaire woman sat stiffly in her chair, her eyes darting around the room as if she was measuring the service with every passing second. She had been brought to the table near the window, yes, but the way it happened had already made her angry. She did not like to repeat herself, she did not like to be ignored, yet here she was, sitting in one of the finest restaurants in the city, and still nobody seemed to understand her words. She tapped her fingers on the table, sharp and fast, a sound that revealed her growing impatience. A waiter approached with a polite smile, carrying a menu written in English and the local language. He set it down gently before her, bowing slightly. The millionaire looked at the menu, flipped it open, and frowned almost instantly. All the words were useless to her. She only read Chinese. She closed the menu sharply, her bracelet clinking against the glass of water on the table. The waiter stood frozen, unsure what she wanted. She began to speak in Chinese, her tone clipped and quick, pointing at the menu, expecting him to understand. But his face went blank. He could not even guess. Her annoyance grew hotter. She tried again, this time slower, pointing toward one section of the menu and saying the words clearly, still in Chinese. But the waiter looked helpless. He smiled nervously and gestured for her to wait, then hurried away. The millionaire sighed heavily, leaning back in her chair, her mind full of thoughts about how ridiculous this was. She was a woman who could buy entire companies if she wanted, yet here she sat, trapped by a simple language barrier. It made her feel small in a way she despised. A different waiter arrived, this one older, perhaps more experienced, holding a notepad. He smiled widely, bowed, and tried to ask her in English what she would like. She stared back coldly, then replied in Chinese once again, her voice rising just a little, sharp enough that the people at the next table turned their heads. The waiter's smile faltered. He quickly wrote something down, but it was clear he was only pretending. He did not understand her at all. She waved her hand angrily, shaking her head, her voice stronger now. The people nearby began whispering, watching the scene unfold. To her, the situation was insulting. She was used to dining in the finest places across Asia, Europe, and America. Everywhere she went, there was always someone who spoke her language, someone who could serve her with ease. But here, in this expensive restaurant, she felt invisible. She felt misunderstood. She felt that her power and her wealth were suddenly useless. She had the money to order the most expensive dishes, to buy the best wine. Yet none of it mattered if nobody understood her words. She began to feel heat rising in her cheeks, her patience thinning like ice under the sun. The staff began to gather quietly near the service station, whispering to each other, unsure how to handle her. One waiter suggested bringing pictures of the dishes. Another shook his head, fearing it would make her even angrier. The manager finally approached, bowing respectfully, and tried in broken English to calm her. "Madam, please, we help," he said awkwardly. But his words did not ease her. She leaned forward, speaking quickly in Chinese, her hands moving with sharp gestures, trying to make him understand. But the gap was too wide. Her voice rose higher, sharper, the sound carrying across the restaurant like a bell. The diners nearby began to murmur louder. Some looked uncomfortable, others curious. They could see that this was a wealthy woman. Her clothes, her jewelry, her very presence spoke of power. But at this moment she looked like any other frustrated person, trapped by miscommunication. Some people pitied her, others judged her, whispering that she was being too dramatic. But she did not care. To her this was about respect. If she could not even order food properly, it felt like an insult to her dignity. The manager tried to offer her a glass of wine on the house, pointing at the wine list, but she brushed it aside, her face dark with anger. She spoke again in Chinese, her tone carrying the weight of command, as if she were addressing employees in her company. But still the staff around her stared helplessly. The feeling of isolation dug deeper into her chest. She thought bitterly, How could they run such a fine restaurant if they could not understand one of the most spoken languages in the world? She tapped her hand on the table harder, her diamond ring catching the light. But her anger was what shined brightest. Minutes passed, and her frustration only grew heavier. She watched other tables receive their meals with ease, couples smiling, glasses clinking, laughter filling the air. Yet at her table there was only silence and tension. The millionaire felt humiliated. She was not used to struggling like this. She was not used to being the outsider. Every time she looked at the staff, their nervous smiles only fueled her fury more. She felt as though they were mocking her, even if they were not. In her mind, their failure to understand was equal to disrespect. Finally, she slammed her palm lightly on the table, not loud enough to cause a scene like a fight, but strong enough to send a shiver through the staff standing nearby. Her voice burst out, fast, angry, in Chinese, her words like a stream of fire that nobody else could understand. The sound drew more eyes across the restaurant. The air seemed to freeze for a moment. Everyone could sense the storm building, and though they did not know what she was saying, they knew she was furious. Her sharp gaze cut through the silence, and the waiters shrank back slightly, wishing they could disappear. Inside her, the frustration was no longer about the food. It was about dignity. It was about control. She was a woman who had built her life on power, on being able to command and be obeyed. Yet here she was, reduced to wild gestures and sounds that no one could understand. Her pride burned, her anger swelled, and the room around her seemed smaller and smaller. She thought to herself, if nobody here understands me, then maybe they do not deserve my money. Maybe they do not deserve my presence. But deep down she still hoped, almost desperately, that someone, anyone, would finally step forward and end her humiliation. The millionaire woman sat at the table with her arms folded tightly, her face hard like stone. The waiters kept moving around nervously, whispering to one another. But no solution came. Every time someone tried to approach her, they left quickly, unable to understand. The food she wanted never arrived. The drink she asked for was still missing, and her patience, already thin, was tearing apart. She was a woman who built her life on power and control. But now she felt powerless, sitting in a restaurant where no one seemed capable of meeting her needs. Her anger had been growing quietly inside her chest, like a storm gathering behind the clouds, and now it was reaching its peak. She tapped the table sharply with her manicured fingers, once, twice, then pushed the menu away with a sharp movement. The glass of water on the table shook slightly from the impact. Nearby diners paused mid-bite, looking at her from the corners of their eyes. They were curious, even entertained. But the woman herself felt humiliated. She was not used to being treated like someone unimportant. She leaned forward, her eyes narrowing at the manager, who was standing just a few steps away. She began to speak in Chinese again, her words quick, sharp, and rising in volume. The sound was filled with command. It was the tone of a woman who was used to boardrooms falling silent when she entered. The tone of someone who was used to being obeyed without hesitation. The staff could not understand the meaning, but they could understand the anger in her voice, and it made them freeze like statues. The manager tried again, bowing deeply, apologizing in broken English. Madam, sorry, please, calm. But his words were like oil on fire. They only made her angrier. She felt as if they were treating her like a child, trying to pacify her without truly respecting her. Her hand came down on the table with a loud slap, this time strong enough to make the silverware rattle. The sound cracked through the soft music of the restaurant, and suddenly the entire room seemed to stop, even the piano in the corner paused as if the player had forgotten his notes. Gasps came from a few tables. A woman whispered to her partner. Another diner leaned back to get a better view. The millionaire's face was red now, her eyes blazing, her lips moving quickly as she fired words in Chinese. A storm of frustration pouring out. Though no one understood the language, they understood the emotion. She was furious, not just upset, not just irritated, but furious in a way that demanded attention. She gestured toward the staff, her arm slicing through the air, her diamond bracelet glittering under the lights like a warning. The waiters huddled near the counter, whispering to each other. One of them looked as if he wanted to approach, but fear kept him still. The manager rubbed his hands together nervously, bowing again. But his bow only deepened her sense of insult. She thought bitterly, bowing means nothing if you cannot even understand me. Her voice rose even higher, cutting through the restaurant, her words fast, sharp, rolling one after another like thunder. Some diners began to shake their heads, muttering that she was overreacting. Others simply stared, fascinated by the drama unfolding in such an elegant place. Inside her mind, the anger was mixed with a deep sense of humiliation. She was not just fighting to order food, she was fighting for her pride. She felt stripped of the power she carried everywhere else. Here, in this restaurant, she was reduced to hand gestures, pointing, and shouting words no one understood. She hated it. She hated the helplessness. She hated that her wealth meant nothing in this moment. Her chest rose and fell quickly, her breaths coming sharp and heavy, her anger now boiling over completely. The atmosphere in the restaurant shifted. The air itself seemed thick. Nobody spoke loudly anymore. Forks and knives rested mid-air as diners pretended not to look while still watching from the corners of their eyes. Even the waiters moving between tables slowed their steps, trying not to make noise. The focus of the entire place was now on the furious millionaire woman by the window. She was like a fire burning in the middle of a quiet forest, demanding attention whether people wanted it or not. The manager tried one last time, stepping closer, holding his hands out in a gesture of peace. "Please, madam, we fix everything," he said in broken English again. But she cut him off sharply, her voice louder than before. The words were in Chinese, but the tone was crystal clear. It was the sound of someone saying, "Enough is enough." Her hand came down on the table again, and this time, the glasses clinked so hard that one nearly tipped over. A small gasp came from a nearby table, and the room fell into an even heavier silence. The millionaire's eyes swept across the room, meeting the stares of a few diners who quickly looked away. She knew people were watching, she knew they were judging, but that only made her more determined not to appear weak. She sat taller, her back straight, her chin raised, her voice still sharp as she continued in her language, scolding the staff who could not understand a word. But the fire in her tone made them understand the message anyway. She would not accept failure. She would not accept disrespect. She would not sit quietly like a forgotten guest. Every second felt heavy, every breath filled with tension, the staff frozen, the diners silent, the woman blazing with fury. It was the boiling point, the very peak of her anger, and though no one could guess what would happen next, everyone knew they were watching the kind of moment that could turn into a disaster or a miracle. The millionaire herself sat trembling slightly with rage, gripping the edge of the table, waiting for something, anything, to change, for someone to finally step in and end the chaos. The storm inside her chest was roaring now, threatening to spill over completely, and the restaurant, filled with frozen faces, waited with how the restaurant had fallen into an uneasy silence. The kind of silence that comes when everyone knows something is wrong but no one dares to move. The millionaire woman sat at her table like a queen without a crown, her arms folded, her face burning with anger. The sharp echo of her voice still seemed to hang in the air. The waiters stood frozen by the counter. The manager stood close by, bowing again and again, his words clumsy and useless, but still he tried. "Madam, sorry, we fix." His broken English was thin, powerless against her storm, and each attempt only seemed to make her angrier. The millionaire leaned forward, her voice spilling out fast and sharp in Chinese, her hands cutting through the air as she spoke. She was trying, desperately trying, to make them understand. She pointed at the menu. She gestured toward the kitchen. She even mimed eating with a spoon. But every gesture felt like a dagger to her pride. She was not a woman who begged. She was not someone who had to lower herself to hand signals. Yet here she was, forced to act out her wishes like a traveler lost. In a country where no one cared, her lips tightened, her chest rose and fell quickly, her anger heavy and unshakable. The staff kept exchanging glances, whispering to each other. One suggested bringing out random dishes. Another shook his head, worried that it might make her angrier. The tension was thick. It was as if the entire restaurant was walking on glass, every step careful, every move hesitant. The millionaire noticed this, and it only deepened her sense of isolation. To her, it felt like the whole room was against her. She thought bitterly, "Are they laughing inside? Do they think I am foolish?" She pressed her palm against the table, steadying herself, but her eyes still burned with fire. The manager, his face pale with worry, tried to use his phone, searching for a translation app. He tapped at the screen clumsily, then held it out to her, showing words that barely made sense. "What food you want?" The sentence was broken, awkward, almost insulting to her ears. She snatched the phone, looked at it, then pushed it back toward him with a sharp motion. Her voice rose again in Chinese, filled with frustration, filled with a pain that came not just from hunger but from feeling. Ignored, she had lived her life being respected, being listened to. But in this room, she was invisible, her language unheard. Around her, the diners kept pretending not to watch, but they were watching every small movement she made, every sharp word, every flick of her hand. Some looked sympathetic, others whispered that she was overreacting. But no one could look away. It was like a play unfolding in front of them. A play filled with pride and anger and silence that seemed endless. The woman felt their eyes. She could sense their judgment, and it only made her sit taller, straighter, her chin raised, refusing to appear weak, even as her heart pounded in her chest. Her thoughts twisted inside her. Memories of boardrooms and deals flashed through her mind. Times when her voice had been enough to silence a crowd of men in suits. Times when her commands had sent dozens of workers into action. She was powerful. She had fought for her position. She had earned her wealth. Yet here, in this restaurant, her power meant nothing. Her money sat useless in her purse. Her authority hung in the air unheard. She felt stripped of her identity, reduced to nothing more than a guest with no voice. The staff stood like statues, their faces tense, their hands fidgeting, afraid to make a wrong move, afraid to make things worse. One young waiter carried a tray past her, but his hands shook so badly that the glasses rattled. He hurried away before she could even glance at him. The entire restaurant seemed to hold its breath, the air heavy, the music faint, the laughter gone. Only the sound of her sharp voice, and the silence that followed when no one understood, filled the room. The millionaire woman's fury began to mix with another feeling, a cold loneliness that pressed against her chest. She was surrounded by people, yet none of them could understand her. None of them could meet her halfway. Her eyes shifted toward the window where the city lights sparkled. She thought of home, of the places where she was understood without effort, where her language carried weight. Here, she felt stranded, a powerful woman trapped in a cage made of words no one could hear. The manager bowed again, his voice trembling. "Please, madam, one moment, we try." But she only shook her head, her lips pressed tight, her eyes flashing. She refused to be pacified with empty promises. Her silence now was heavier than her words. She sat still, her fingers gripping the edge of the table, her gaze sharp as a blade, waiting, demanding, almost daring someone to find a solution. The storm had roared, the fire had burned, and now the silence itself was a weapon. It was the calm before something greater, something unexpected. Every diner in the restaurant sensed it, though none could guess what would come next. The tension clung to the air like thick smoke. The millionaire's anger was no longer wild and loud. It was cold, silent, pressing down on everyone around her. The staff felt it most of all, their shoulders tense, their feet heavy, their minds scrambling for answers they could not find. And in that silence, the millionaire sat like a queen surrounded by subjects too afraid to speak. Her pride unbroken, her anger unshaken, her heart pounding with the weight of being misunderstood. She had reached the edge of her patience, the boiling point had passed, and now the silence was its own battlefield. Her eyes darted toward the staff, toward the diners, toward the window, and back again. She waited for someone, anyone, to rise from the silence, to bridge the gap that had made her feel so small. The struggle was not only about ordering food anymore, it was about being seen, being heard, being understood, but for the moment, all she had was silence, and the silence was louder than anything she had shouted. The silence in the restaurant was heavy, like a thick curtain no one dared to touch. The millionaire woman sat tall in her chair, her eyes cold, her lips pressed tight. Her anger had burned so fiercely moments before, but now it had settled into a deep, sharp silence. The waiters stood frozen near the counter, afraid to move, afraid to speak. The manager kept bowing, his face pale, his words useless. The diners around the room kept sneaking glances, pretending to eat, but their attention was locked on her. Everyone felt that something had to happen, yet no one knew what it would be. Then, out of nowhere, a small sound broke the silence. It was a soft voice, calm, hesitant, but clear. The voice belonged to a young waitress who had been standing in the background the whole time. She had been carrying trays, clearing glasses, and watching the scene unfold. She was not the most experienced waiter in the restaurant. She was new, quiet, almost invisible compared to the others, and until now, she had not dared to step forward. But at that moment, something inside her pushed her to act. She could not watch the scene any longer. She took a step closer to the table, her hands gripping the tray tightly, her heart beating fast. Her voice came out softly at first, but then stronger, and the words she spoke were in perfect Chinese. The sound of her Mandarin flowed across the table like water breaking through stone. "Good evening, madam, may I help you?" she said, her pronunciation smooth, her tone respectful. Her voice filled the air like a surprise note in a silent song. The millionaire froze, her eyes widened, her lips parted slightly. For a moment she thought she had imagined it. Her ears, tuned to the language of her heart, could not believe that someone here, in this foreign place, had just spoken to her in flawless Chinese. She blinked, her anger paused, her silence shattered. She leaned forward slightly, her eyes narrowing, testing. You speak Chinese?" she asked quickly, the words rushing out of her mouth. The waitress nodded, a small but steady smile on her face. "Yes, madam, I do," she replied, her voice respectful yet confident. The entire restaurant seemed to exhale at once. The staff near the counter gasped softly, their eyes widening. The manager almost stumbled in surprise. The diners leaned forward, whispering, shocked by what they had just heard. This quiet waitress, who had been invisible moments before, had suddenly become the center of the room. She had stepped into the fire without fear, and in doing so, she had shifted the entire atmosphere. The millionaire's face, once red with fury, softened slightly, her sharp eyes now filled with relief and curiosity. She felt as though a rope had been thrown to her while she was drowning. Her voice, still quick and commanding, poured out in Chinese. "Finally, someone understands. I have been waiting and no one could help me." Her words were sharp, but the tone was lighter now, almost desperate. The waitress listened carefully, nodding with respect, writing notes quickly, her every gesture showing patience and understanding. The millionaire explained exactly what she wanted, the dishes she preferred, the way she liked her food prepared, the kind of tea she wanted served before her meal. Her voice rushed, spilling all the frustration that had been building, and the waitress kept up with every word, her head nodding, her eyes steady, her tone calm as she repeated the order back in Chinese to confirm. For the first time since arriving, the millionaire felt heard, truly heard, and it was like a sudden weight lifting from her chest. The other staff members watched in awe, some with relief, some with embarrassment. Why had none of them known the waitress could speak Chinese? The manager felt a mix of shame and gratitude. He bowed again, gesturing for the waitress to take full charge of the situation. The diners, too, were fascinated. They whispered about the young woman, about how she had saved the restaurant from disaster, how she had stepped in when no one else dared. Their eyes flicked between the powerful millionaire and the humble waitress who had dared to speak. The millionaire leaned back in her chair now, her posture relaxing just a little, her fingers no longer drumming against the table, her eyes still sharp but softer than before. She looked at the waitress with a kind of cautious respect. You saved this evening," she said in Chinese, her tone still proud, but carrying a hint of gratitude. The waitress bowed lightly, her hands folded before her. "It is my duty, madam, I only wish for you to be comfortable," she replied. For the first time that evening, the millionaire allowed herself to breathe easily, the sharp edges of her anger melting slowly into relief. She had been on the edge of leaving, on the edge of creating a scandal. But this one young woman had changed everything with a few simple words. The storm that had threatened to tear apart the room had been calmed. The silence had been broken not by force, not by apology, but by understanding, by language, by a connection she had longed for since she sat down. The diners turned back to their meals now, but their eyes still flicked toward the scene. The tension was broken, replaced with murmurs of admiration for the waitress. The staff began to move again, more confidently now, taking cues from the young woman who had just stepped into her power. The restaurant was alive once more, though the focus remained on the table by the window, where the millionaire, once fuming and furious, now sat calmer, her pride still intact. But her anger finally softened by the voice she had been waiting for. The waitress bowed once more before leaving to place the order, her steps quick but steady. The millionaire's eyes followed her, thoughtful, her lips pressed but no longer trembling with fury. Inside her mind, she admitted something quietly to herself. This young woman had done more for her than all the polished staff and the nervous manager. She had restored her dignity. She had given her back the sense of respect she demanded, and for that, she would not forget her. And so, in that moment, The entire evening shifted. The fire of anger was replaced by the warmth of understanding. The millionaire, though still proud, allowed herself to relax, and the waitress, though young and small in presence, had suddenly become the hero of the night. All because she dared to speak when no one else could. The moment the young waitress spoke in Chinese, the entire restaurant changed. It was as if a window had been opened in a suffocating room. Fresh air flowed in, and everyone could breathe again. The millionaire woman, who had been red with anger just minutes before, now leaned back in her chair, her face softer, her eyes still sharp but calmer. She stared at the waitress with surprise, a mixture of relief and respect flickering in her gaze. At last, someone understood her. At last, she was no longer trapped in silence. The waitress listened carefully, her head slightly bowed, her notepad ready. As the millionaire began to list her requests in Chinese, her words poured out quickly, one after another, as if she needed to release all the frustration that had been bottled inside her. She explained how she wanted her soup hot but not too salty, how her main dish must be cooked with precision, how the tea should be poured before anything else. Her voice was still firm, but it no longer shook with fury. It carried the confidence of someone who finally felt heard. The waitress repeated the order back in Chinese, her tone clear and respectful, and for the first time that evening, the millionaire smiled. It was not a wide smile, but it was real. Her lips curved slightly, her eyes softened, and she gave a small nod. The other staff who had been standing nearby watched in disbelief. They had spent the entire evening lost, confused, helpless. Yet this young waitress had turned everything around with just a few words. The manager felt his shoulders relax for the first time in an hour. He bowed quickly, signaling the others to let her take full control. The restaurant, once heavy with tension, began to breathe again. The diners who had been staring returned to their meals, though some kept glancing back, whispering in admiration about the young waitress. The piano in the corner started playing softly again, filling the silence with gentle notes. Laughter slowly returned to a few tables. The disaster that had nearly exploded into a scandal was quietly dissolving, all because one voice had broken through the wall of misunderstanding. The millionaire sipped her water now, calmer, her fingers no longer tapping against the table. She studied the waitress with a keen eye, noticing the way she stood with confidence, the way her words in Chinese flowed smoothly without hesitation. The woman who had been invisible minutes ago now shone like the most important person in the room. The millionaire thought to herself, "This girl is different. She carries something rare, something valuable." Her respect for the waitress grew with every passing moment. Soon the food began to arrive, dish by dish, exactly as the millionaire had asked. The waitress herself carried the plates, setting them down with care, explaining in Chinese what each one was. The millionaire tasted the first spoonful of soup. Her eyebrows lifted slightly. It was just as she had wanted, hot, delicate, and perfectly flavored. Her lips pressed into a satisfied line. She nodded, and the waitress bowed politely, a spark of pride glowing quietly in her eyes. The other staff members looked at her with awe, some even with shame. Why had they never known she had such a skill? The manager felt grateful, though also embarrassed that he, the one in charge, had failed where she had succeeded. But he pushed those feelings aside, focusing instead on the relief that the crisis was over. He silently promised himself that he would never underestimate her again. The diners, though returning to their meals, kept whispering about what had happened. Some admired the millionaire for standing her ground. Others admired the waitress for her courage. A few even clapped softly under the table when the millionaire finally relaxed. It was as if the entire restaurant had witnessed a small miracle, a shift from chaos to calm, from anger to peace, from storm to sunlight. The millionaire, now eating with slow, satisfied motions, felt her pride settling back into place, her dignity restored. She no longer felt humiliated. She no longer felt invisible. She had been heard, she had been respected, and for her, that was everything. Each bite of food tasted better not only because it was cooked well, but because it carried the sweetness of being understood. She looked up at the waitress again, her voice calmer now. "You are very skilled," she said in Chinese, her tone proud but softened by genuine gratitude. The waitress bowed, her hands folded neatly. "It is nothing, madam, I am happy to help," she replied, her cheeks warming slightly from the praise. She was not used to being the center of attention. Yet in this moment she stood taller than anyone else in the room. She had not only saved the restaurant from disaster, but she had also touched the heart of a woman who rarely allowed herself to be touched by anyone. The atmosphere in the room continued to change. Laughter began to flow freely again. The clinking of glasses filled the air. The piano played a brighter tune. It was as if the storm had passed and sunshine had returned. The millionaire's presence, once heavy and terrifying, now seemed lighter, even graceful. Her face carried the calm authority of someone who had been satisfied, and the staff moved with more confidence under the new order of the evening. Inside the millionaire's mind, thoughts circled. She was used to people obeying her, but very few impressed her, very few earned her true respect. Yet this young woman had done so with nothing more than words. Words that bridged the gap between isolation and belonging. She realized something she rarely admitted, that wealth could not always buy understanding. Sometimes it took a simple act of courage, a voice willing to step forward when everyone else stayed quiet. The waitress returned once more to refill her tea, her movements graceful, her presence calm. The millionaire's eyes followed her, and in that moment, something unspoken passed between them, a quiet respect, a bond built not on money or power, but on the simple strength of language and understanding. It was a moment the millionaire would carry with her long after she left the restaurant, a reminder that sometimes the greatest surprises come from the most unexpected places. And so the restaurant, once on the edge of chaos, now sat in perfect balance. The millionaire woman, once fuming with anger, now enjoyed her evening with peace. The staff, once trembling with fear, now moved with confidence. And at the heart of it all stood the waitress, once silent, now the quiet hero who had transformed the night with nothing but her voice. The food was on the table now, steaming hot and smelling rich. The millionaire woman lifted her chopsticks slowly, her face calm again. The anger that had burned inside her was no longer sharp. Instead, she felt a surprising lightness, as if a heavy stone had been lifted off her chest. Every sip of tea, every bite of food felt different because this time it came with respect. It came with understanding, and that was worth more to her than the price of the dishes. The waitress stood nearby, always ready but never overstepping. She watched the millionaire carefully, noticing even the smallest gesture. When the woman raised her hand slightly, she poured more tea. When the woman finished one dish, she quickly brought the next. Her movements were smooth, polite, and filled with care. The millionaire kept glancing at her, not with irritation anymore, but with curiosity. She wondered who this young woman was, how she had learned to speak such perfect Chinese, and why she, unlike the rest of the staff, had dared to step forward. After a few moments of silence, the millionaire spoke softly in Chinese, her tone slower than before, no longer filled with fire, but with something else, something almost gentle. Do you know how hard it was for me to sit here, surrounded by people, and yet feel completely alone? Her words carried weight, and the waitress looked at her with respectful eyes. She nodded, answering quietly, I can imagine, madam, it must have felt frustrating. The millionaire gave a short laugh, not the kind of laugh filled with joy, but the kind that hides pain. Frustrating is too soft a word. It felt humiliating. She placed her chopsticks down for a moment, leaning slightly closer, her voice softer. All my life, I have been in control. I have built companies. I have walked into rooms where everyone turned to listen. But here, when no one understood me, I felt powerless. I felt as if my voice had no meaning. Her eyes glimmered faintly, not with tears, but with an emotion she rarely let anyone see. Do you know what it feels like, when your own words fall into silence? The waitress hesitated, then nodded again. Yes, madam, I know. I have been in places where nobody spoke my language, where I felt invisible. It is lonely. Her answer was quiet but true, and for the first time, the millionaire felt a spark of connection. She studied the young woman, realizing that she was not just polite, but she understood, truly understood, not just the language but the feeling behind it. The diners around them went on with their meals, but at this table, the world felt different. It was no longer about food. It was about dignity, about the human need to be heard. The millionaire took another sip of tea, her hands steady now, and she said, When I came here, I expected everything to bend around me. I thought money would be enough. I thought my presence alone would demand respect. But it didn't, not until you spoke. Not until you saw me. Her tone was softer than ever, her pride still there, but mixed with gratitude. The waitress bowed slightly, her cheeks warm. It was nothing, madam, I only did what was right. But the millionaire shook her head. No, it was not nothing, it was everything. You gave me back my place. You gave me back my voice. Her words were firm, her eyes holding the young woman's gaze, and for a moment, there was silence again, but not the heavy silence from before. This silence was gentle, filled with understanding. The millionaire began to eat again, slowly, savoring each dish, but between bites she spoke more, telling the waitress about her travels, about how she often visited countries where few spoke her language, about how most times she had assistants with her, translators who handled everything. But tonight I came alone, she said, her voice steady. I wanted to see if the world could meet me on my terms. I thought I was strong enough, but even I felt small when no one could understand me. The waitress listened quietly, her hands folded before her, her heart heavy with empathy. She respected the woman not only for her wealth but for her honesty. It was rare to hear someone so powerful admit to feeling vulnerable. She bowed her head lightly and said, "Even strong people need to be understood, madam. Language is not only about words, it is about being seen." The millionaire looked at her with surprise, then gave the faintest smile. "You speak with wisdom beyond your years." As the evening continued, the mood at the table grew warmer. The millionaire asked the waitress small questions, where she had learned Chinese, how long she had been working here. The young woman explained that she had studied languages at school. Her father had encouraged her to practice with tourists, and though she worked quietly in the background, she had always wanted to use her skills to help. "Tonight," she said softly, "was the first time I truly needed to." The millionaire nodded, her eyes thoughtful. "And tonight, you reminded me of something important, that money cannot buy the feeling of being understood, that sometimes respect comes not from power, but from empathy." Her words were not loud, but they carried deep meaning, and the waitress bowed again, humbled by the compliment. The other diners might not have heard their conversation, but they could see the change. They could see the once furious woman now sitting with calm dignity, speaking with the waitress as if she were the only person who mattered. The staff too felt the shift. The fear that had gripped them was gone, replaced by relief, by pride in their colleague who had turned the entire night around. The millionaire finished her meal slowly, each dish prepared exactly as she wanted. Her anger completely melted away. In its place was gratitude, not loud, not showy, but quiet and real. She looked at the waitress one last time before the dishes were cleared and said in Chinese, "Tonight, I was reminded that even the strongest need someone to listen. You were that someone for me." The waitress bowed deeply, her eyes shining with humility. And so the evening that had begun in fury was now ending with warmth. The emotional shift was complete. The millionaire was no longer the storm she had been when she arrived. She was calmer, wiser, and unexpectedly touched by the kindness of someone she had never noticed before. A young waitress who had turned her loneliness into connection with nothing but her voice and her heart. The plates were cleared one by one. The table was wiped until it shined. The tea was refilled for the last time. The millionaire woman leaned back in her chair, her face calmer than it had been all evening, her eyes sharper now not with anger, but with thought. The storm had passed, but something inside her had shifted forever. She had come into this restaurant expecting only food and comfort, but she was leaving with something she had not expected, an experience that touched her pride, her patience, and her heart. The waitress stood nearby, her posture straight, her hands folded neatly. She did not speak unless spoken to, but her presence carried a quiet strength now. She was no longer the invisible girl at the corner of the restaurant. She was the one who had turned the entire night around. The millionaire kept watching her, remembering how a few simple words in Chinese had broken through the walls of misunderstanding, remembering how in that moment of silence, she had felt seen again, respected again. The feeling was priceless. As the millionaire placed her chopsticks down, she called softly in Chinese, "Come here." Her tone was no longer sharp, but commanding with warmth. The waitress walked closer, bowing slightly, waiting. The millionaire looked up at her for a long moment before speaking. "Do you realize what you did tonight?" she asked, her voice steady. "You saved me from humiliation. You gave me back my voice, and you saved this restaurant from disaster." Her words were heavy with truth, and the waitress lowered her gaze modestly, shaking her head. "Madam, I only did my duty, nothing more." The millionaire's lips curved into a faint smile, the kind that showed both pride and respect. "No, it was more, far more," she replied firmly. "In a room full of people, you were the only one who dared to step forward, the only one who understood. That is not ordinary, that is rare." The staff nearby listened quietly, their eyes wide. They had never seen the millionaire speak with such softness, and they had never seen their colleague receive such praise. Even the diners at the surrounding tables leaned in slightly. Sensing that something important was happening, the atmosphere in the restaurant grew warm, filled with curiosity and admiration. The millionaire reached into her designer handbag, pulling out a small leather wallet. She opened it gracefully and took out a thick bundle of notes. The sight of the money made the staff gasp softly. She placed it on the table, sliding it toward the waitress with calm authority. "This is for you," she said in Chinese. "A small sign of my gratitude." The waitress froze, her eyes widening. She shook her head quickly, her hands lifting slightly in refusal. "Madam, I cannot accept this. I only did what was right." But the millionaire leaned forward, her eyes locking onto hers, her tone firm. "You will accept it, because this is not just money, it is respect, and respect must be given where it is earned." Her words carried weight, and the waitress, though hesitant, bowed deeply, finally taking the money with both hands, her cheeks warm with emotion. She whispered, "Thank you, madam," her voice steady but trembling slightly from the feeling in her chest. The millionaire was not finished. She looked at the waitress with a thoughtful expression, her mind turning with ideas. "Tell me," she asked, "do you wish to work here forever, or do you dream of something bigger?" The question hung in the air like a challenge. The waitress blinked, surprised. She had never been asked such a question by a guest before. Her voice came out quietly. "I want to learn more languages, I want to travel, I want to grow, but for now, I am here to support my family." The millionaire nodded slowly, her eyes narrowing with focus. "Then perhaps one day, when you are ready, you will not serve tables, but you will stand beside people like me, guiding, translating, making sure no voice is ever lost." Her words carried not just praise, but possibility. The waitress felt her heart leap, though she remained respectful on the outside, bowing again. "Your words honor me, madam." The diners could feel the shift. They whispered softly about the millionaire's generosity. Some smiled, others clapped under the table. The staff stood straighter, proud of their colleague, and the entire restaurant seemed to glow with the warmth of the moment. The scene had transformed from chaos to harmony, from anger to gratitude, from silence to connection. Finally, the millionaire rose from her chair, her elegant dress flowing as she stood. The entire room seemed to pause for her. She adjusted her handbag, then turned to the waitress one last time, her voice soft but commanding. "Tonight, you reminded me that money cannot always buy respect. Sometimes respect comes from courage, from kindness, from understanding. Never forget that." Her words struck deep, not only for the waitress but for everyone who overheard them. The waitress bowed deeply, her eyes shining. "I will not forget, madam," she promised, and the millionaire gave a final nod, her lips curved in the faintest smile. Then she turned and walked toward the door, her heels clicking softly against the polished floor. The staff bowed as she passed. The diners watched silently, and the doors opened wide for her as she left into the night. The young waitress stood there for a long moment, holding the weight of the gift in her hands, but holding something far greater in her heart. She had not only earned money, she had earned respect, respect from a woman who demanded the world, and who rarely gave her admiration to anyone. She breathed deeply, feeling both humbled and proud. She knew this night would stay with her forever. And so the story ended not with anger, not with scandal, but with dignity and hope. The millionaire left with her pride restored and her faith in people touched. The waitress stayed behind, her heart filled with a memory she would never forget. The restaurant returned to its usual rhythm, but everyone who had been there that night knew they had witnessed something rare, something true, a reminder that one voice, spoken at the right moment, can change everything.